Well, thank you, Phil, very much. This this came together rather quickly, and I'm very happy for it. As I get older, I get overcome with emotion more easily than before, and I can promise you, I'm very overcome seeing all of my friends here. I didn't expect to see most of you. Well, I'm going to read a poem by Charles Wright. You probably know he was a poet laureate a few years ago, called Yard Work. I think that someone will remember us in another time, Sappho once said, more or less. Her words caught between the tongue's tip and the first edge of the invisible. I hope so, myself now caught between the edge of the landscape and the absolute, which is the same place and the same sound that she made. Meanwhile, let's stick to business, everything else does. The landscape, the absolute, the invisible. My job is yard work. I take this inchworm, for instance, and move it from here to there. I don't actually have a lot of poems to read to you, but what I have are long. So I'm going to butt against Phil's limit, I'm afraid, and I'll keep the, my witty repartee in between the poems to a minimum. This first one is called Mandalay Photograph. And it's about a trip that Vic and I made to Burma, Myanmar, a few years ago. It's actually not about the trip, but the photograph was taken there. He was Army, out of uniform, guiding tourists for a few extra bucks, listening for sedition between stops. He would have been a decent human being in the right circumstances, which these were not. But he stopped on the stone bridge when we asked to take our picture, and with practiced eyes, framed the bridge against the moat and templed mountain in the distance, putting us in the center of it all, capturing our pleasure at being there and our pleasure at being there with each other. It's not a great picture. I've looked thinner. I've been thinner, but Vic is radiant against the sky in the confidence of his pose. When I close my eyes to summon Vic's face, it comes a bit at a time, and I never get all the pieces right. A face learned by heart for over 27 years. How extraordinary to need a photograph now to recall exactly how he looked. Clarity comes in an instant and unexpected. What I remember clearly are gestures, some small action that was ignored at first. Not ignored so much as unnoticed. The way he lifts his head slightly, looking up and away as though unaware of the camera, or releases his lips into the luring smile that pulls shade out of the time of day. I hold the photo in my hand, picked off the floor where it slipped from the album. It's a relic, like me, like Vic, taken with a camera instead of a phone when those were two separate ideas. My index finger gently wipes a faint smudge from his cheek, handsome still. I don't have enough words to write about this. How does one explain a hallowed self? How can words describe an emotion so vast even its form eludes recognition? I touch his smile and beg passion to leave my finger, to leave whatever is left standing of this old body. I was told time would become my friend, and I believed my friend would empty me of longing. I was wrong. Time empties nothing. This one is called, there's nothing to explain, I don't think, except that I seem to write on one theme all the time these days, and here's another example of it. It's called Still Life with Coffee. With each new morning, you know less about morning. You become used to having something less to remember. The scrap of conviction turned into an empty space against your body, as though nothing was ever there. Perhaps nothing was there, ever. You are up early, the moon is up before you and full, though closing in on the trees behind your house as the sun rises opposite. A bird sings outside the window, the same bird you're convinced that has come every morning for years, a faithful and good companion who never tires of keeping a small chance open to teach a poor student with even poorer aptitude her song. You've grown old failing at music. Of course, it cannot be the same bird any more than the sun can be the same sun that let you down yesterday. You walk disappointment to Café Midi, where the intelligent tell each other their intelligence over words that rise above the tables, above the trees surrounding the tables, to the stars you do not see. Now you wait to know what happens next. When certainty is wiped of its last point and the bird's song runs out of breath, the last cup cleared from the table, the future comes down to absence, something you live with like a bad choice. You have a story that explains absence, but you don't know it's true, and you don't know it's not true. All you know is what remains. The bird remains, the cafe full of talk, and morning remains. This morning, which becomes a tepid latte on a table where you wait to get over it, where you wait to get it over. It's a myth to be happy. Be satisfied with that. So, I made a trip to the island of Terceira, which is in the Azores archipelago, part of Portugal. This is the island my grandfathers were born. And this is a poem about that. Grandfathers. It would not have been Sunday, not here. The day prior to leaving just at dusk, they would have turned their backs to the ocean, looked toward the peaks of the verdant hills that shape the heart of this ancient island, and watched a modest blush come to the mist in its slide over the farms and rock walls and penitent footprints pressed in the soil against the old road winding through it all to Angra and its harbor, and the ship waiting to take them away from this place, which would no longer keep all its children. There must have been a time to say goodbye, gathering the family and friends, some waiting for a turn to go themselves. A room that filled with laughter at stories everyone had heard many times before, but still never tired in the retelling. And tears that began here only to end in a place no one here could imagine. Someone must have helped decide what to pack in a suitcase as small as the options. Who selected the photograph to send, the mannered pose that would remember home? Migrating to the new land, new language, what could they have thought in that old language they neither read nor wrote? Out of worry, out of faith, every thought became prayer, every rise in the cold waves a question, and then they were there. It seemed the same sun, but names for trees and birds had to be learned. Pastures for cows had to be tilled and sown. Working days had to adjust to starting with the absence of salt in the air. and the comfort of ocean so far away. They followed the soft sibilant music of the old language to new neighborhoods, with new neighbors and into new houses. In truth, old houses, with rent they could make when the market price for milk was decent. And so the sun rose and the work went on in the new land as fertile as the old. Marriages were made, children were baptized, bells pealed with a strain of Latin accents. Everyone was learning American. Language alone doesn't define a home, but connects a home to an old story, which is, despite the glorious exploits of heroes and courage of warriors and labors of the common, where statues and monuments put up in their honor, a fiction where light always says spring and the turn of day drifts towards symmetry. Still new words drop into the old story: migration, resettlement, displacement, movement, relocation, separation, homecoming. During my last visit home, I'm struck by how the childhood landscapes have changed. Not by what they have changed into, but how much of them are no longer mine. I mark the distances by who is gone. The absent stand as a constant presage to the end, my end, once just conjecture. So with a friend, the finish more or less in sight, I am drawn to look for the beginnings, to visit the graves of my grandparents, spread apart from each other by almost 100 miles of California highways, and nearly 5,000 miles more from where they started, from where we started. When reading their names, their dates, I'm aware of how little I learned about their lives, how little I asked when there was a chance for answers. Just one of many regrets I packed along to my new Asian home, where time and again the simplest of things prove themselves impossible to get done. If I had stayed, how would my life have gone? I cannot imagine. My grandchildren do not carry my name and are too young to care about my stories. They're old stories anyway, centuries old, and end there. The title of this poem is also the first line of the poem. It's called The Best of All Possible Worlds. Something you've heard before. Leibniz, though German, wrote this in French, perhaps a reach for poetry, n'est-ce pas? Le meilleur des mondes possibles. Did he believe it? A person can believe anything. His beliefs rest on a trust that God is good, a proposition in want of still more evidence. The Greeks have a word for it naturally: anthropocentrism, humans' self-admission to being the most important entity in the universe, as opposed to the competing ideology, bovinocentrism, cows' self-admission to being the most important entity in the universe. All that self-importance gives rise to humanity's charge, the terrible responsibility to protect this life, this earth, from humanity's careless watch. Anyone who would confuse this world for the best possible one has their eyes closed, n'est-ce pas? Imagine for just a moment something about the world you would like to change. Perhaps something about injustice or inequality, or an imbalance between envy and arrogance, or the eradication of disease and war. That you can think of something is proof the world could stand a good polish. And surely, if you can think of one thing, you can think of two. You can make a list. For who better to know perfection than you, who once touched a perfect smile and untouched it because you were young and impatient and stupid about how ordinary the familiar perfection feels against a finger? Who better to know perfection than someone who lost it, someone who forages through decades to find it again? As people grow older, so does Earth. True, people and Earth don't march around the universe at the same pace, and no one really understands either's progression. But understanding might not be the point. Pleasures become elusive with age, hungry and hard to satisfy. Look up at stars and imagine the secrets beyond the beguiling fires. The young presume the tiny lights attend only them. Unyoung know stars serve everyone and no one. Your old eyes trace stories from particular stars on particular nights that followed particular days. Days of long walks over green land, a lone cloud to make the blue sky visible, and the dark caramel eyes of the person who pulled your hand into the love of sunlight and into all those colors. These days are fragile and full of things you do not want to know. Bad things, cruel things, cries and screams, the gurgle of breath through blood. Things inhumane, but very much human. Things you don't want to know, so you don't. Your gaze falls toward trees and streams and birds against clear skies and serene landscapes. The artful smiles of memory grow indifferent to accuracy. And so the world gets better in the telling. If not perfect, if not best, what we have. I have brought a prop for this poem. This is one of the poems that Cynthia helped me with, for which I'm very grateful for her sharp eye. It's called Ritual. It has become a morning ritual of sorts. Not every morning, but when the mood strikes and Providence summons the makings. I put together a Bloody Mary with a high octane kicked out of it. It satisfies a craving, a tomato juice, a dash of salt, a grind of pepper, some days a pinch of this, a soupçon of that, a splash or two of something else. I don't measure anything and never make it the same 2 times running. And however it turns out is the taste I want. And better, if I say so myself, than the real Bloody Marys I drank at Harry's New York bar in Paris, where the drink was invented years before I was born, which is years before any of the tenders behind the ancient mahogany were born. It's not for the drink, good as it might be, but for the relief of ritual, the confidence that actions repeated to a specified purpose bring comfort to steel the heart against a sadness that lives deep within, a black hole from which no light escapes. A long life can be made from rituals, behaviors collected and repeated like swells in the flow of a small river that runs beside pastures on which children play in the dirt among oaks and humble foxtails, and begin the slow process of turning experience into a person fit for the seasons ahead. We are of this earth, and therefore temporary. Yet we grieve at having to leave this terrible place with which we so easily fall in love, and we grieve to leave the cherished with whom we fall in love. Hardly insight, though the sense of it all after countless millennia persists outside comprehension. Earth moves on regardless. Since nothing certain comes with the talent to be born, all the possibilities of imagination are open to choose among, as a child might choose from rows of multicolored jars in a candy shop. Our imperative, which may not be declined, remains to live here with the others who live here until such time as we can't anymore. Because, honestly, we know nothing. We gather rituals, create order to fill the need for consolation. From that order, our thoughts grow still, rest, until the beloved appears to take our hand for a walk through the village in the rosy glow blanketing houses in a cool twilight. And the unbearable sadnesses of the coming years become invisible to our minds for a time. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, David. You guys can all unmute now. Unmute.